Good evening all, and welcome. I love forests. Not only are they super peaceful and chill places to hang out, they're also the host for many horror stories, which I love to read and share with you. It'd be such a shame if they didn't exist anymore. Anyway, my wife has recently started a YouTube channel. It's about the environment, which I hope some of you guys are interested in. I mean, I am. And that's why I did forest stories today. Her first video is about the importance of trees and planting trees. It would obviously mean a hell of a lot to me if you guys would check her out, see if you enjoy her first video, maybe leave her some feedback. I know I've been doing that a lot lately, asking you guys to check people out, but it really would mean a lot. So if you think you'd be interested, please check her out at the end, or pause this into it now. But yeah, that would be super awesome. But without further ado, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. This happened around 3 years ago, when I was away from school on a trip. The trip was for younger students. A few people from my year in school had been asked to go to help look after the younger children. To give perspectives, I was 14 when this happened. I was about 5'2", female, and probably weighed less than 100 pounds. One particular day, the children were doing an orienteering activity in the woods, basically using a compass to follow a trail to find your way to the end of it. It was the third day into the trip, and by this time a group of 4 boys, who I now know all have severe behavioral problems, had taken a liking to me for whatever reason. Therefore, when the children got asked who they wanted their chaperone of the group to be, they chose me. We started the activity, and for the first 10 minutes the group of boys seemed to be doing what they were supposed to do, and I could see other groups from my school in front and behind us. So I thought everything was going fine. The woods that we were doing this activity in were huge. I had no experience with using a compass, and neither did the boys in the group. The boys I was looking after quickly became disinterested with the activity and started to run in random directions, climb trees, etc. After around 40 minutes of chasing these boys in random directions through the woods that I'd never been in before, I realized we were completely lost and expected to be at the finish line soon. I began to panic. I was only 14 and had been put in charge of younger children. Therefore, I knew I would be held responsible for getting them lost. I ended up being able to scare the boys enough, telling them the teachers would go crazy if we weren't back soon, to make them focus and help me find a proper path, as by now we were walking through bushes and trees and completely off any type of path. This is where it gets creepy. After walking down this path for 10 minutes, I see a clearing in the trees up ahead. I couldn't see what was in this clearing, so hoping it was an exit from the woods, I started jogging up to it, followed by the boys. As I turned the corner and got a better look at the clearing, I stopped dead in my tracks. It's hard to explain how I felt when I first saw this man. All I can say is that I have never felt in so much danger before in my life. My whole body was completely glued to the spot, and I could feel the color drain from my face. In the clearing, there was a man sat on a bench. He looked to be around his mid to late 40s, slightly overweight, and looked homeless. He was balding. However, the hair he had left looked damp, like it was greasy. His eyes looked glazed over, and his mouth sort of hung open. That's when I realized on closer inspection, he had red stains all around his mouth. It's hard to describe this man, but the vibes I got were pure evil. Think Fat Trevor from GTA 5. At this point, my fight or flight instinct kicked in. I spun round to see the boys behind me, who I had completely blocked out. They all looked absolutely terrified, as they had been stood behind me looking at this man too. I shouted "Run" to the boys, and sprinted past them as fast as I could. I can honestly say I've never run so fast in my life. I could hear all the boys running behind me, and they were literally screaming bloody murder. I didn't even look back for a second, to be completely honest. I was only thinking about myself in this moment, and getting the hell out of there fast. I knew the man was chasing behind us, because the boys were screaming, and he's coming behind us. I don't know how the boys were shouting so much. All I could think of was my imminent death. Fortunately, my creeper was overweight and couldn't keep up with 5 teenagers who just got the biggest adrenaline rush of their lives. I'll never know what would have happened if we didn't run, or if the man caught up with us, and I can honestly say I'm glad. We came across 2 elderly women walking their dogs about a half hour after the incident, and managed to hitchhike a lift back to the camping grounds. I knew it was stupid, but it was either sweet old ladies offering help, or stay in the woods with fat cannibal Trevor. So creepy guy in the woods, let's not meet again. Nothing has made me not want to go back into the woods, but I've had some strange experiences and seen some disturbing stuff. I've walked into 2 marijuana grows and into 1 still site. I backed away slowly from all 3. The marijuana sites were strange because it took me a minute to realize what I was seeing. When you're picking your way through fairly thick vegetation, a plant is a plant until it isn't. I did have an unexplained sighting of a creature about 7 years ago. I'm not sure what that was. I'm trained in animal identification by tracks, scat, and sight. It honestly looked a lot like the Bigfoot you hear about in stories. I actually was walking into a spot where I duck hunt. It had snowed several days before and had frozen/thawed a few times, so there was a really thick crust on the snow. I'm a big guy and could easily walk on top without breaking through. As I walked along a farm path, I heard something in the forest to my right. Looking, I noticed a shape maybe 30 yards away, trying to hide behind a pine tree. I could see it clearly. It kept sliding to the left and peering out around the tree trunk. I stopped, and it turned and ran away downhill, crossed the upper end of a frozen beaver pond, breaking through the ice, and crossed an open field on the other side and disappeared into the woods. I lost sight of it before it broke through the ice, and it scared me. Shaking, I drew my pistol and made my way back into the field on the far side of the beaver pond and looked at the muddy tracks where it came out of the water. They were just smudges. It wasn't even denting the packed frozen snow. I went down to the water to look at the broken ice. It was thick enough for me to stand on, and I tried it. I went back to the tree that it was trying to hide behind. There was a limb that was across its face, so I knew I could get a height estimate. That limb was even with the top of my head when I was standing where it would have stood. I'm 6 foot, so that thing would have at least been 6'6" or more. What was it? It was bipedal, stood at least 6'6". Maybe it was a person. What could possibly make a human cross a frozen pond in cold 10 degrees Fahrenheit weather? not knowing if the ice would support them, or even how deep the water was. Then, where did this now very wet person go into a 300-acre forest? There is still a logical explanation. I just don't know what it is. My mum's family used to live in the countryside in the northern region of Colombia. It was the late 70s or early 80s. I don't know exactly when. My grandpa had his own farm. He wasn't a big landowner though, but he owned a small farm in the middle of the Serranía. He has worked since he was 11 years old because my great-grandfather died when he was just a kid. During all his teenage years, he learned everything related to farming: how to tame horses, herd cattle, grow plants and whatnot. And he was indeed very knowledgeable on agriculture, since they lived amidst the dense jungle. It was normal to hear witches laughing or whistling, and hearing the screams of La Llorona. Not only that, it was a tight-knit community. Everyone knew each other and knew each other's business. My grandpa used to work for the big landowners of the region. However, there was one he always refused to work with. It was an extremely wealthy landowner. He had a number of heads of cattle, horses, and it was said that he also had thousands of hectares of land where he cultivated rice, potatoes, yams and cassava. There was a rumor going around that this guy got all his possessions overnight by making a deal with the devil. Locals wouldn't work for him. Most people who did were unsuspecting foreigners who ignored the whole story. They were seduced by the high wages they were offered compared to those that they would have made if they'd have worked anywhere else. Most of the foreigners learnt quickly about the boss's wrongdoings. But if we take into account that Colombia back then was even more of a shithole than it is today, what other option did they have? It was that, or perish from starvation. Everyone was aware that one of the clauses of the deal was that the landowner had to sacrifice the life of one of his employees and give his soul to the devil every single year at around the same time, August. They would find one of his workers dead near the river every year. And as you might think, this couldn't last forever. And the landowner's luck came to an end when all his employees started to quit. They moved to the main cities, found other jobs with other landowners, and this in part was also triggered by the guerrillas and gangs forcing people from their homes. The landowner suddenly found himself completely alone. He couldn't find anyone to take care of his crops or cattle, so he started to sell everything but his mansion. And then August came. My grandpa and uncles told me that it was a horribly gloomy day, and that night a huge storm, the likes of which they had never seen before, broke into their area. They heard deafening thunders and dreadful screams of agony that made their houses rattle, and saw horrendous lightning illuminating the pitch-black skyline. Everything ceased at 3 a.m, so they could barely catch up on sleep that night. Once the sun rose in the morning, everyone started their usual day. But that same day, they were told that the landowner had been murdered. The whole town then rushed to his mansion, and what they found was so gruesome and spine-chilling that up to this day, it sends shivers down their spine. The landowner was strapped to an oak tree, beheaded, and his entire body seemed to have been split in half with a saw. People who talked to him during his last days said that he was going crazy, and he often talked about a fight with the devil. Therefore, everyone thinks that the landowner challenged the devil to a duel to the death, and he literally got smashed to pieces. This experience was legit one of the most terrifying things that's happened to me while walking my dog, and he's done some weird stuff. So back in 2015, I had a choice of getting a dog or getting a smartphone. I'd never had a dog in my life, or a decent smartphone come to think of it, and I'd been saving up for a phone anyhow, so naturally I picked the dog. My dad knew a fella who had a couple of border collies that recently had a litter, so we drove out. The dude gave me the last pup, and enter Bailey. A couple of weeks later he got his shots, and I started walking him. My parents figured I was going to be hanging out at the local park with my new pup, so I could get him socialized. But no. I chose to take him around the perimeter of a nearby farm to keep the farm dog in him. I'd been sneaking out to this farm for years. The farmer was an old family friend, and my uncle had grown up working with him, so I knew if I were ever caught, I would just drop their name. On either side of the farm, there was some thick woodland, which no one had ever given me reason to be wary of. They probably should have. So it's a sunny afternoon. It had been pouring down all week, and Bailey was itching for a good walk. I take him to the farm at our usual time, and we start making our way around the woods on the east side of the farm. Everything is quiet, but Bailey keeps darting away for me to explore. He's a puppy. It's what they do. But of course, I'd been calling his name all the way around the field. We're about halfway past the woods, and I could see the roof of the farmhouse over the next hill. Bailey's been pulling crap out of the bushes all the way along, and I just gave him into trouble for rolling in a pile of fox crap. That's when I heard a man's voice calling my dog's name. Like this dude I didn't even know was calling my dog by name. I knew it wasn't the farmer because I'd met him at family events like barbecues and weddings, so I knew what he sounded like. I go completely silent, but the guy keeps calling my dog. It sounds like he's deep into the woods and maybe moving, but he's calling my dog with such an excited tone in his voice, and that is what creeps me out the most. Bailey, meanwhile, is completely ignoring this guy and sniffing a now flat pile of poop. I'm a tiny 18-year-old girl. The most combat experience I have is a month learning taekwondo when I was 11, and I don't have a mobile phone. If that guy works out where I am, I'm screwed, and if Bailey decides to go after him, I'm double screwed, because I'm not letting this possible psycho get his hands on my puppy. I can either run to the farm, which isn't too far away, or run back through the fields towards home. I pick up my dog and sprint across the fields. Behind me I hear someone emerge from the woods, but I'm already over the fence and sprinting back home with my puppy tucked under my arm. I get home and tell my mum. She brushes it off as some weird drunk guy. A few weeks later I'm at my uncle's house, and the farmer walks in. I'd told my uncle what happened, so he brings it up. The farmer asks exactly which woods I'd been close to, and that some of his clothes had gone missing from his washing line. He put it down to strong winds, but now he's not sure. I take him and my uncle to the exact spot the next day, and all three of us go in and find a completely wrecked campsite. There's no clothes or anything, but the tent had collapsed in on itself. There's no fire, but there are some empty gas canisters, like the ones you'd use for portable stoves, and empty packets of food scattered everywhere. We reported it to the police, but nothing really came of it, except that I got a phone not long after, and kept it on me whenever I went out. I love waking up in the dark and walking the sunrise with my dogs. I didn't intend to own 2 huskies and a German Shepherd mix, but they each found me, and I couldn't turn them away. We usually jog about 5 miles daily, often in the neighborhood, but nearly as often I load us up into the van and drive 10 minutes to the wooded metro park. I love it there. They offer some trails that allow quads and motorbikes, some cycles and skis, some just people. And last year they opened a new one that allows pets. It's a 5-mile loop into the area farthest from the city. We live on the northern edge of town, but in the dark, with no leaves on the trees, you can clearly see the red glow of the CVS sign for most of the hike. These are tamed woods, with asphalt paths and concrete fire pits, and rangers patrolling regularly. And the hospital behind CVS means there's emergency medical care in walking distance. I was up coughing again in the night. I had a serious case of pneumonia 2 months ago, and was not fully recovered when this sinus infection hit me. I'm past the fever part, so we're walking again, but not yet jogging. But after being up in the night, I didn't get up in time to go walk before I dropped my kids off at school. Then my youngest had an appointment, and then I had to run a few errands. And then we had unexpected visitors right after school, and then they stayed for dinner. And finally, I got the dogs into the van, and we made it to the park just before it got dark. I was irritated at all the little things that had kept me from my walk all day. But as we drove all the way to the back of the park, I realized we'd be walking the sunset, watching it over the lake and the hills and throughout the bare trees. As the park was clearing out now, as it started to get dark, we may very nearly have the place to ourselves, and might not have to pull off the path to let others pass us. An amazing number of people who are afraid of dogs hike the pet path. All those little irritations had led up to this singular moment of beauty I would not otherwise have been able to appreciate. This was going to be a really good walk. Funny how life works out when you let it. I parked in my spot at the furthest end of the parking lot by the bathrooms. A mile-long path looped through the woods and by the lake and came out by the bathrooms. I liked to run it when I came here alone, as that one was walkers or jogging only. It was a glorious walk through a Bob Ross painting. My mind cleared and my thoughts quieted, and I simply experienced the woods. My feet on the path, my dogs panting, the nature sounds, the beauty of the sky. I absolutely loved it. About halfway now, and the city sounds had faded away until I could only hear the birds, the frogs, and insects all singing their songs of territory and mating and life. When there was a crack, breaking the utter silence and absolute stillness, my dogs and I turned instantly towards the source of the sound and froze. Behind us, and to the right, the sound had come from the crest of a hill. I could see nothing, and heard only the dogs panting. I waited for the nature sounds to return, but they did not. All three of the dogs slowly raised their ruffs, fur standing on end around their shoulders and neck, tails held tall and proud, making themselves look larger and more threatening. I took a step towards them, and the female husky, the leader of my little pack, instantly put her ears back and her head down and pulled me to the path. All three of them left their tails and ruffs up, but the two males also put their ears back and heads down and began to pull me. So off we went. The woods were still silent. We must have startled a buck on the slope of the hill and not seen him. And after we passed, he leapt up the hill and jumped a dead tree, and his hoof hit a dead branch, and the branch broke, cracked, and scared everyone. Why were the woods still silent though? Maybe there was someone up there. Homeless people stay here sometimes. The bathrooms have heat, so the pipes don't freeze. This is about as far out as the path goes. It would be a good place to sleep. Maybe he's getting up a shelter, and a crack broke the branch. Why were the woods still silent though? We were about as far away from the city as we could get in these woods, and you couldn't see the CVS sign, or the glow from the streetlights, or even hear the traffic noises. We were deep. It was dark and still, and absolutely quiet, except for the panting dogs and 4 sets of footsteps on the path. I wanted to run. The dogs wanted to run. It must have been a Bigfoot breaking a log, telling me to get out. But there are no Bigfoot in city limits. I promise you that, Brain. It was a deer. The woods are still quiet because of us. I have 200 pounds of dog hair. They're all big huskies. And another 200 pounds of me. Yeah, I'm a little fat, but I've got good muscle underneath. I have broad shoulders that don't fit into women's shirts, and big hands that don't fit into women's gloves, and can lift 100 pounds over my head. We are the scariest thing in the woods. There are no bear, there are no wolves, and no Bigfoot. There are deers, there are foxes, and there might be an angry raccoon, but we are the biggest, baddest, scariest thing here. Unless there's someone with a gun, my mind says. Shut up, you're not helping, Brain. The dogs had not stopped once to sniff or mark. Heads down, ears back, tails and ruffs still held high. They just wanted to go. We'd gone almost a mile now, me craning my head the whole time, trying to see as far as I could in all directions, while letting the dogs pull me down the path. And it was still absolutely silent. Not an overflying goose, not a cricket. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound, except us. Here came the third and longest of the 3 steep hills on the trail. I had been running these to rebuild my strength and endurance, but if I ran this, I'd be blown at the top. The top where it curved around as it crested, and you couldn't see anything past the thick trees. The top where if you were deeper in the woods, you could follow a more gradual ridge up to the crest of the hill and wait, unseen, for someone to come up the path. Ambush. It was a deer. Turn around. It was just a deer. But what if it's behind us? It's an ambush. Is it a deer? Do they have a gun? And this is why I ran. The noises in my head were unbearable. Up the hill, I walked. I pay attention and I watch the dogs. They were still on alert, but did not hesitate to go up the hill. In fact, they wanted to go faster. Just walk, don't get smoked. Be able to run or fight if you have to. I'm scared. The woods should not be silent. The dogs should not still be on alert. It's not a cat or a bear or a wolf, and I really doubt it's a Bigfoot. It could be a person. So let's be smart, just walk. We are not good prey. The dogs will protect me. The huskies might not alone, but the shepherd will, and they will follow his lead. Be smart. Get out. All I could think to myself. There was only another mile now until the lake and the first parking lot. Then another half mile along the lake to the second lot, where my van was. Hearing traffic noises now, but still no birds, no crickets and no frogs. The smell almost stopped me in my tracks, but the dogs kept pulling. Sour and grassy, and oddly metallic. And shit? Shit and blood? And partially digested grass? I smelled the contents of a deer's stomach. Someone hunted in these woods. And the dogs were not interested in the smell. We ran. I don't remember much of that last mile. We just ran. Denza, the big female husky, finally stopped to drink some lake water as we came out by the parking lot. Then she began to sniff and pee, the boys following her lead. There was a single truck parked. I relaxed quite a bit, but still felt on edge. Down the lake in the parking lot, I could see headlights. They must be parked at the turnaround at the end of the lot closest to the lake, as they illuminated the lakeside path. They were watching us. Halfway to the van now, and the car drove away. 20 feet from the van, I heard a motor coming down the nearest path. I decided to put the dogs in the car on the driver's side instead of the passenger's side like normal. The sound of the motor came closer. The leashes caught on the armrest, and I had to untangle them before the dogs could jump into the van. The motor came closer down the path. I had to be gone before it came out. I knew it with absolute certainty. Finally, the dogs were in. I slammed the door and jumped in the front, fumbling for the lock button, shaking hands, unclipping the keys from my jogging belt, and starting the car and gunning it into reverse. And, as my headlights swept over the entrance of the path by the bathrooms, they lit up a four-wheeler coming out of the woods. I was dropping the transmission into drive and hitting the gas, and as my brain processed what my eyes saw, it informed me that there was something across the handlebar. A gun? A deer carcass? I couldn't tell because of the angle when pulling away. I couldn't see him in the rearview mirror. When I was 10, I was at a lake way out in the woods on some land my dad owned. I was alone aside from my dog, an Airedale Terrier. I'd been fishing on the little pier in the southeastern corner for about 10 minutes, when I noticed something or someone watching me from the tree line on the other side of the lake. I was only about 10, but I kept my composure. For some reason I felt it important that whatever/whomever it was did not know that I was aware. Anyway, it started moving slowly from tree to tree, never taking its eye off me. The lake was about 75 yards wide, so I couldn't see any details, but I could tell which way the figure was facing. I realized that it was stalking me, and I nonchalantly put my pole down and walked down to the pier and up the bank towards the trail back to our cabin. Once I hit the tree line, I hauled ass to the cabin and waited there with one of my dad's guns until my parents got home. The only witness I had was my dog, and he saw it as well. I know because he was staring intently at the figure while giving a low growl until I quietly told him to stop. I have no idea who or what it could have been, but I now know its intentions were most definitely not good. In the early 90s, we didn't live there as our home was in Mobile, Alabama, but we spent most weekends up there. I know it could have been a person, but the nearest neighbor was a very old couple that lived a few miles away. The closest paved road was a good 15 to 20-minute drive away from our land, aside from the lake and the open area our cabin was on. The surrounding area was all really thick forest. The figure was extremely tall as well. I have an extremely good memory, especially for details. Also, shortly before I actually noticed it, I got a very strong, I'm gonna be watched by something dangerous feeling. I've never felt safe there again, and I was glad when my dad sold it and got a place near Gulf Shores. One of my experiences happened on family land that we own in North Carolina, where I used to live. I still hunt, so it's never kept me from going again. We call it the noise. To this day, if you ask people who live or lived adjacent to the land about it, they know exactly what you're talking about. Whatever it is was very loud and very fast. It was like a very loud primal scream. The first time I heard it, I was hunting with my dad and brother. We were stalk hunting and very, very slowly and methodically moving throughout the forest. I noticed everything had gotten oddly quiet. The only thing you heard was the water running over the rocks in the creek. My dad stopped us and said to hold still and not to move. As soon as we stopped, it screamed behind us. It was so loud it made my ears ring. My dad never showed fear and was always rational. He looked very nervous, and I'm ready to shit on myself. My brother has his gun shouldered, looking around trying to spot it, just to see what it is and make sure it isn't close. Then it screams again now. It seems closer and in front of us. My dad puts his hand on my shoulder and just says, "Run for the car now." I jump up like a scared rabbit and run as fast as my legs will carry me. We're all running, and we can hear this thing screaming as we run, like it's keeping pace with us. I can see the gravel road ahead, and know the car is close. It lets out another scream that sounds like it's on my left now, and very close. I bolt right, and we all come sliding out onto the road about 100 yards above the car. That's when I hear this weird whistle from the woods, and then everything just goes back to normal. Birds chirping away, squirrels calling, crows cawing, and we stopped to catch our breath and uneasily walked to the car ready for anything. 100 yards never seemed so far away. That wasn't the last time we heard it. In fact, it happened many other times. My family tried to find it for many years to figure out what it was. We even trained hunting dogs, but they ran away from this. Weird stuff. But I still love to hunt, and figure that if something gets me while I'm hunting, at least I'm doing something I love and being close to nature. I lived in South Central Pennsylvania. The Pennsylvania State Game Commission continues to deny the existence of mountain lions in the state of Pennsylvania, despite many sightings over the years. I've seen two. both in the area near my parents' rural town. The first sighting occurred when I was a teenager. It was just about dusk, and I planned on walking home from my grandmother's to my parents' house. I got about halfway through the large field that I would cross to get to the path to my parents' house, when I noticed something moving along the tree line. Initially, I thought it was one of the neighbor's dogs, but it wasn't moving like a dog. I stopped to watch, as it dawned on me what I was really looking at. It was a dusky, dark, tan cat, bigger than any cat I had ever seen. I realized what it was, and slowly backed up across the field and back to my grandmother's, where I requested a ride home. The second was seen by multiple neighbors before we saw it out the window. This cat was much darker in color, almost black, but similar in size, and certainly not a bobcat. We've also seen rather large tracks when hunting two separate mountains in the area. Unsure why the Game Commission persisted that they are extinct and a fragment of everyone's imagination. But mountain lions are definitely out there in the Appalachians still. This happened in August of 2008. To preface, I was 16 and stupid. I was in love with my then boyfriend, the way that Ariel was 16 and in love with Prince Eric. His parents were split up. He lived with his dad, who was really strict and kind of scary. On the weekends, he stayed with his mum. His mum lived down the street from my aunt and best friend. At night, I would sneak over and we would hang out until the early hours of the morning. Anyway, we were caught and weren't allowed to see each other. Eventually, both of our parents got over it and conceded that we could see each other at a county fair, with his dad and stepmom supervising. At the fair, my then boyfriend Gabe told me he wanted to see me that night. He told me that he was going to walk to my house in the middle of the night. My house is probably 10 miles from his. I told him no, that he was crazy. And long story short, I decided to walk halfway to meet him. It was probably midnight, a full moon, and I'm walking along the streets. I had 2 cars stop and ask if I wanted a ride. I was terrified a cop was going to see me and take me home to my parents. So I said, no, thank you. I'm just going right up here to both cars because I'm 16 and 125 pounds of no muscle. I met Gabe and we walked to his house, probably because my parents were actually awake at my house and his mum would be asleep. I tell him about the scary cars that stopped and asked if I needed a ride. He asks why I didn't take one of them up on their offer. No one asked him if he needed a ride. He would have taken one. It would have been faster to meet me that way. We get to his house, make out, hang out, and I eventually decide I need to leave before my parents wake up and notice I'm gone. I try to go to my aunt's, but no one's home, so I start walking. It's summer and about 5 a.m., so it's light out, and I decide to take a different road back home. I'm walking along this long stretch of road that I've been on many times when I take the bus to school. I'm listening to my iPod and see a pretty old cell phone on the ground. I pick it up and I'm surprised because it turns on and it works. A couple of cars have passed me and I'm starting to get a little anxious on how long it's going to take me to get home before my parents wake up. I think about what Gabe said, about how if someone had offered him a ride, he would have taken it. I decided that if someone stops and offers me a ride, I will take it. I really didn't want to be caught and grounded again. I'm not actively trying to hitchhike, putting my thumb out for a ride though. I'm carrying the phone and wondered if it had service, when an old beat-up car slows down next to me. I turn my head slightly as I'm walking, and an older man starts talking to me. "Do you want a ride?" he asks. I finally stop and take a closer look. He looks unkempt, hair starting to fall out, is unshaven and a bit on the heavy side. My stranger danger sense is tingling, but I told myself I need to stop being such a wuss. I needed to get home, and I'll just tell creepy car dude to drop me off at the casino. That is only about 3 miles away. I think that I'll at least shave some time off my trek. I get in the creepy guy's car, and he starts driving. He asks me what my name is, how old I am. I give him my very common middle name, and tell him I'm 18. I remember debating telling him my real age, thinking maybe it would make him think twice about doing anything funny with a minor. All of a sudden, creepy care dude puts his hands on my knee and tells me how beautiful I am. I'm frozen. I don't know how I'm supposed to react. I'm uncomfortable, and alarms are going off in my head. "Thank you," I say. He starts to move his hand a little more, and we pass the casino. I tell him that the casino is fine, really, and that he doesn't have to keep driving me. He tells me he's going to a specific road closer to my actual destination, and he doesn't mind helping me out. I think of anything to distract this guy, and to get his nasty hand off me. I pull out the cell phone I found earlier, and start talking animatedly. "Look what I found when I was walking. I found it right before you pulled over. It still looks like it even works. I wonder who it belonged to." I'm saying anything to keep myself from panicking and giving away the fact that I'm scared. It works. The creepy dude's eyes got bigger. It looks like he's struck gold. He takes his hand off me to grab the phone. "Oh, I'll hold onto that for you. I'll make sure it gets back to the owner." I nod enthusiastically, agree that's what's best, and he keeps the cell phone in his hand, checking it out. He drives past his initial road, saying he can take me even closer to my place. I thank him profusely and act more bubbly, and start talking about random nonsense. In reality, I'm still afraid of him knowing which road I live on. He finally gets to my driveway, which is about 200 feet or a little longer, with several different driveways that you can pull into. You can't see my house from the end of it though. He pulls over on the road and says, "I'll just drop you off here. I think it's probably best that your parents don't see me dropping you off. Wouldn't want them to think anything." He winks. I smile and nod and thank him. He mentions something about seeing each other around, still smiling and nodding. I start walking up to my driveway, and I wait until he drives off to run up to my house. I'm amazed and so grateful that nothing happened to me. I really don't know what would have happened if I didn't find that cell phone to distract him with, because I don't want to find out. I don't make stupid decisions like that anymore. I think I used all my lifetime luck to get out of that seemingly unharmed, and I hope to not meet again. There's a spot in the Pines Barren in South Jersey with a monument to Emilio Carranza, known as the Mexican Lindbergh. He was an exceptional pilot and lost his life when he encountered an electrical storm and his plane crashed into the Barrens. If you're not familiar with the Pine Barrens, it's literally 1 million acres of nothing but pine trees, little lakes, and trails, and the home of the Jersey Devil, of course. The story goes that if you're out near the Carranza monument on the anniversary of the crash, you can hear his plane struggling vainly to stay in the air, or if it's after dark, see the lights of his plane. So one year we had nothing better to do and decided to see if it were true. We head out to the monument, which is about 10 miles from the nearest road, and sit around and wait. After a while, we start to hear the sound of a propeller plane, which, no big deal. There are plenty of small airports around, so that isn't exactly creepy. It starts to get weird though. When it became clear that the noise wasn't getting any closer or further away, it was just a constant drone, as if you were standing near a plane idle on the runway, and it didn't stop. We were out there for an hour or so just listening. It was crazy. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I do hope that you enjoyed tonight's Horrors from the Woods. It is one of my favourite topics. Like I said at the start, my wife has recently launched her own channel. If you'd like to check it out, as it would mean a hell of a lot to me, it will be on screen shortly and at the top of the description. I'm going to end this video there for this very reason. So, stay awesome. Check out my wife's channel if you'd like to. Drop a like and leave a comment, and I'll see you in the next one.